the emperor who thought he was a god, Rome's most delusional tyrant. Picture this: the most powerful man in the known world, draped in a lion's skin, wielding a club, standing over the corpses of exotic animals he's just slaughtered in front of thousands of screaming Romans. But this isn't some theatrical performance. This is the Emperor of Rome, and he genuinely believes he's the mortal incarnation of Hercules. Welcome to the unhinged reign of Commodus, the gladiator emperor who turned the Roman Empire into his personal fantasy arena. The golden boy gone wrong. Commodus Antoninus didn't start as a monster. Born in 161 AD, he entered the world with literally a twin brother and the entire Roman Empire as his birthright. He was the first son born to a reigning emperor in over a century. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king immortalized in history as one of Rome's 5 good emperors. The cosmic joke? The wisest emperor in Roman history raised its most delusional. But here's where it gets interesting. Marcus Aurelius, the man who wrote the Meditations and preached Stoic virtue, broke a century-long tradition of adopting the most capable successor. Instead, he chose bloodline. He chose his son. Some historians whisper that Marcus knew exactly what kind of man Commodus was becoming, but imperial dynasty demanded he pass the throne to his own flesh and blood. Others suggest the great philosopher was simply blind to his son's true nature, seeing only what a father wishes to see. By age 5, Commodus held the title of Caesar. By 15, he was joint emperor alongside his father. The propaganda machine of Rome churned out images of the young prince as the perfect heir, strong, handsome, golden-haired. Roman coins bore his face, and the Senate showered him with titles. But those close to the imperial court noticed something disturbing. The boy who would be emperor was already showing signs of the megalomania that would define his reign. The death of the philosopher, the birth of the tyrant. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, probably from plague in a military camp along the Danube, 19-year-old Commodus inherited the largest empire the world had ever seen. His first act? Immediately abandon his father's military campaigns and rush back to Rome for the comforts of palace life. The Germanic tribes Marcus had spent years subduing. Commodus signed quick peace treaties and essentially bought them off. The senators who had counseled his father, he viewed them with suspicion and contempt. What Rome didn't realize was that they hadn't just lost a philosopher-emperor, they'd gained something far more dangerous, a man-child with unlimited power and an unquenchable thirst for adulation. Within months, assassination attempts began. Some were real, many were probably imagined, but each one pushed Commodus further into paranoia and megalomania. His response was to construct a government of terror, where anyone could be accused of treason, where senators trembled at the mention of their name in imperial correspondence, where loyalty was measured not in competence but in the enthusiasm of one's flattery. Enter the arena, when fantasy became policy. Here's where Commodus's story transcends typical imperial excess and enters the realm of the truly bizarre. The emperor didn't just watch gladiatorial games, he participated in them, obsessively, compulsively, with the kind of dedication most rulers reserve for actual governance. But calling Commodus a gladiator emperor doesn't quite capture the absurdity. He fought as a gladiator hundreds of times, but these weren't real fights. They were elaborately staged productions where the most powerful man on earth could act out his delusions without risk. His opponents? Carefully selected criminals? Disabled veterans? Or men armed with wooden swords facing an emperor with steel? The ancient historian Cassius Dio, who actually lived through this madness, recorded the horror with barely concealed disgust. Commodus would enter the arena, kill ostriches with crescent-headed arrows, decapitate them, then parade around holding the severed heads while staring meaningfully at senators, a none too subtle threat about what happened to those who opposed him. He slaughtered elephants, rhinoceroses, hippopotami, and exotic animals imported at massive expense from across the empire. Rome's treasury hemorrhaged gold to satisfy one man's need to feel heroic. In a single day, he reportedly killed 100 bears. The crowd was required to cheer, the Senate was required to attend, and everyone was required to pretend this was normal. The Hercules delusion, when emperors become gods. But the animal slaughter was just the warm-up act. Commodus's true obsession was rebranding himself as Hercules reborn. He appeared in public wearing the Nemean lion skin, carrying a club, adopting the poses of Hercules from classical art. Statues of the emperor as Hercules sprouted across Rome. He renamed months of the year after himself. He rechristened Rome itself as Colonia Lucia Annia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. Think about that for a moment. The eternal city, the center of civilization, renamed after one man's ego. He forced the Senate to declare him a living god, though unlike previous deified emperors, Commodus insisted on worship while still breathing. Religious ceremonies traditionally honoring Jupiter or Mars were redirected to honor Commodus Hercules. The line between emperor and deity, always blurry in Roman politics, was now completely erased in his mind. His grip on reality was slipping, but his grip on power remained absolute. Anyone who questioned his divinity, who failed to applaud enthusiastically enough at his arena performances, who was reported by informers as insufficiently reverent, disappeared. Some were executed, others were forced to commit suicide. The most prominent found themselves fighting actual gladiators in the Colosseum, a death sentence dressed as entertainment. The price of madness. The economic devastation was staggering. Commodus's arena obsession wasn't cheap. Each appearance required elaborate preparations, exotic animals, special equipment, and massive bribes to everyone involved to maintain the fiction of his prowess. The imperial treasury, carefully managed by previous emperors, was squandered on spectacle. Meanwhile, the actual business of empire, frontier defense, infrastructure maintenance, provincial administration, was outsourced to a rotating cast of chamberlains and favorites who bought their positions and governed accordingly. Corruption metastasized. The provinces suffered. The military grew restless. But perhaps most telling was the psychological toll on Rome itself. The Senate, once the deliberative heart of Roman governance, was reduced to a terrified audience forced to watch their emperor play dress-up. The Roman people, accustomed to bread and circuses, were getting plenty of circuses, but the bread supply was increasingly uncertain as imperial finances collapsed. The end of the fantasy. After 12 years of madness, Commodus's story ended not in the arena, but in a bathhouse on December 31st, 192 AD. His wrestling partner, Narcissus, strangled him in his bath after a failed poisoning attempt by his mistress Marcia. The conspiracy included his closest advisors, the Praetorian prefect and the chamberlain. The very men who had enabled his delusions finally recognized that their own survival required his death. The Senate's response was immediate and savage. They passed a damnatio memoriae, a condemnation of memory. His statues were torn down. His name was chiseled off monuments. The months he'd renamed were restored to their traditional names. Rome itself was, thankfully, no longer the colony of Commodus. The lessons of lunacy. Commodus's reign offers a masterclass in how quickly absolute power can corrupt absolutely, especially when placed in the hands of someone psychologically unprepared for it. Here was a man raised with every advantage, educated by the finest minds, heir to a tradition of capable governance, who nonetheless descended into a delusional fantasy that nearly bankrupted an empire. The historians of Rome, writing in the decades after his death, portrayed Commodus as the moment Rome pivoted from the golden age of the Antonines into the crisis of the 3rd century. Whether he caused that decline or merely symbolized it remains debatable. What's undeniable is that his reign demonstrated the fundamental vulnerability of autocracy. Everything depends on the character of one individual. Marcus Aurelius, for all his wisdom, couldn't see or wouldn't acknowledge what his son was becoming. Or perhaps he did see it and felt trapped by the demands of dynasty. Either way, the philosopher-emperor's greatest failure wasn't on the battlefield or in the Senate. It was in his own home, where he raised a successor who confused divinity with delusion, strength with slaughter, and government with theater. In the end, the emperor who thought he was Hercules died like any mortal, betrayed, strangled, and erased. The gladiator emperor's final opponent wasn't some theatrical enemy in the arena. It was reality itself, and in that fight, he never stood a chance.